Because one day somebody asked him if he would participate in a social experiment playing his violin. And he said, "Sure, sounds like fun." And that's how he came to be playing his violin at a New York subway station early one morning during the morning rush. Good evening, dear community members. My name is Gillian Haley. I'm the founder of Justicewise, and the producer of this Festival of Belonging. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of my co-hosts, the Sonoma Intersections Coalition and the Area Agency on Aging. They're a new partner, so I'm still getting their name to roll off my tongue smoothly. Welcome to this year's final event for the festival, a talk with our special guest, Dr. Joshua Bamberger. Also, our wonderful sponsors deserve some recognition. I'd like to say thank you to the Taos Institute, to St. Joseph Health, and to our wonderful host, the Glaser Center. And I just want to give them some special applause for their support, which enabled us to offer this as a free community building event. You over to Daniel to introduce Dr. Bamberger. I'm going to take about 5 minutes and talk about homelessness, social isolation, and how the Festival of Belonging sees them as two sides of the same coin. But first, let's return to the other Joshua. Remember Joshua Bell in the subway busking early in the morning? What happened during that 43-minute experiment? Who stopped to listen to one of the finest violinists in the world play his Stradivarius? Well, here are the highlights. Out of over 1,000 people who passed by, 7 people stopped to listen for a few minutes. Children stared and tried to stop, but their parents rushed them along. One person recognized him and stayed and listened to the end. Altogether, 27 people tossed money in his violin case, and at the end, when they counted it, there were $32.17. Bell was out of context, right? People were preoccupied and busy going about their lives. They quickly stereotyped him as a subway busker and were unable to see or hear what was actually happening. Outside the door, and to the left, there's a hallway with photos of homeless men. As an experiment, the owner of a famous gallery in Carmel interspersed the photos of the famous men with photos of famous people on the wall. When the patrons came in, they saw pictures of Churchill or Kennedy next to Reed and Kevin. Some of the men were invited to the gallery exhibit and they listened as the patrons exclaimed, "Isn't he that banking CEO?" Or, I think that's, what's his name, that famous baseball player? When the gallery owner revealed the experiment that was going on, the patrons were amazed. They wanted to hear the stories of how the men became homeless. Some patrons offered resources to help, a connection, a car, a job, you get the idea. People dropped their stereotypes to see and hear who was actually there. Neighbors who were having a hard time. The Festival of Belonging began last year as a way to break through our stereotypes and our fast-paced lives and get to know our neighbors. Not only our unsheltered neighbors, but also our housed neighbors. Because our housed neighbors suffer from an invisible affliction that you can't see, not all of them, but quite a few, that's like an inner homelessness, and it's called social isolation. Now, social isolation is a rabbit hole of its own, which I leave to you and Google to explore. But I would like to say that the Surgeon General is sounding the alarm that it's a growing social epidemic all across our country. It affects all ages, all socioeconomic classes, all education levels, genders, heartlands, city, rural areas. It is affecting everyone, or it can affect anyone. And the research suggests that it's worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, because it leads to chronic inflammation that underlies illnesses like heart disease. And you can have a large family and go to all the best parties and still suffer from it. The Festival of Belonging is about getting to know all of our community members as human beings, fully deserving of kindness and respect. That's the first step to build trust and connect and feel like you belong. Then we can start to ask kind questions that enliven closed-off hearts. Questions like, is my neighbor okay? Do they need help? What do I have to give that would help? Currently, when it comes to homelessness, we tend to respond by thinking about how to fight it. The thing is, where do we find it? Where would someone go to fight homelessness? We see people on the streets. Do we fight it there? We see our government passing laws and making policies and carrying out enforcement that doesn't seem to make the problem go away. Do we blame them to fight it? Mother Teresa said, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. Doesn't that sound a bit like asking kind questions instead of fighting systemic challenges? Could Mother Teresa's example be how we end the homeless emergency and a host of other problems caused by feeling attacked and feeling alone in our communities? Affordable housing will get people off the streets, and that's a great thing, but it isn't going to solve the challenge of inner homelessness. Social isolation. Only kindness and respect is powerful enough to handle both of those challenges. And I believe that a caring human heart is the most precious instrument of all, even more precious than a Stradivarius. And I wonder, how would our community respond if we open our hearts and play it, instead of stereotyping our neighbors and blaming them for societal failures that we have yet to solve? The I Belong Project aims to find out, and I invite you to join us. We're in our second year, and all you have to do is ask the kind questions. Before turning you over to Daniel and Dr. Bamberger, I invite you to ask the person sitting next to you a kind question and listen to their response. Michael, if you could move the slide to the question. Oh, Josh, if you could move it, thank you. What matters to you that drew you here on a Saturday night? And the question's up there, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. So I'd like one of you to ask the question and the other to respond, and then after 30 seconds, we'll switch.
Good to see you all engaged in this conversation. We really appreciate you coming out to be with us this evening. Like Gillian mentioned, my name is Daniel Weinzweig. I help coordinate the Sonoma Intersections Coalition. We're a coalition made up of 20 different agencies ranging from government to property managers, developers, to social service agencies, nonprofits, and working to come together around the issue of this housing crisis. So showing up with affordable housing work as well as issues of homelessness. Our work is really animated through 3 separate focus areas. The first is educating leaders about trauma and resiliency-informed practices. The second is around advancing policies to protect residents. So we're not just saying build, 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 but let's think about the people who we're building these units for. And then finally, engaging and empowering residents so they know their rights. So if they're to help them avoid being abused in the different housing situations they find them in. So our vision as a coalition, we're working, this is our first year, we're wrapping up. We'll be around for probably 2 more years, and then we need to figure out where our funding source comes from. But our vision is that all residents have access to safe, truly affordable, sustainable, and dignity-affirming housing that enables Sonoma County residents to be healthy and to thrive. And this is why we're here tonight, to learn some best practices from a man who's been doing some incredible work in this space in a very challenging environment. So tonight, we have the incredible opportunity to be joined by Dr. Joshua Bamberger. As a primary care physician who's worked with California's homeless population for almost 30 years, Dr. Bamberger has firsthand experience addressing health issues with housing solutions. He has forwarded many innovative and impactful solutions to addressing the health, housing, and human crisis that is homelessness. He's currently a professor of family medicine at UCSF and is the new associate director of UCSF Benioff's Homelessness and Housing Initiative. I'd like us to give a warm Sonoma County welcome to Dr. Bamberger.
It's great to be here. Last time I was up here in Santa Rosa, I'm a primary care provider and I work for the VA. So I run the homeless clinic for homeless veterans, in downtown clinic for homeless veterans in San Francisco. And during the fires, some of the physicians at the VA clinic here in Santa Rosa had their houses burned and they were out of work. So I was up here for a while taking care of veterans. It was great. Veterans that I cared for here in Santa Rosa were actually a lot easier to care for than in San Francisco because almost everyone I saw, at least at that time, were housed. And you can do a lot more as a primary care provider for someone who has a home than you can on the streets. This is a picture that I took last week, 10 days ago, of a Assiniboine, which looks a lot like the Matterhorn, but it's in the Canadian Rockies. So I spent 7 days walking in the rain. That was the only moment that the clouds cleared that I got that picture. So I'm going to tell you some stories. I'm going to start with a personal story, and then I'm going to tell you some things about my experience having worked with homeless folks in policy for the last 30 years, and hopefully generate some questions and some answers for Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. I think there is pretty good opportunity to make some headway, but we have to really be targeted. We have to be focused on what we're trying to do. So the title of this talk for me is around freedom equals health. And that's, I've been giving talks for a long time, and it's always housing equals health, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I think that autonomy and self-determination really is such a critical piece in trying to figure out how to make decisions in a resource-poor environment. So to start, I'll show you a picture, see if this goes. So in 1987, I get in a cab with my dad, who lives in Brooklyn at the time. And I say to him, I'm really suffering with the misery of the world. And I think I need some help. I don't think I'm gonna make it in medicine unless I get some therapy. But Dad, I don't have any money. I can't afford it. And he says, what % of your problem do you think is caused by me? And I say, I don't know, 10%. No, maybe 20%. No, fuck you. And at the stop sign, I get out, and I don't talk to him again for another 3 years. So what is it about that story that's relevant to this discussion? Well, first of all, I'm here today. So clearly I did not derail my progress towards helping people living with poverty. Because I had a sense of hopefulness about the future. Took out more student loans, got some therapy, moved on, reconciled with my dad. But there's another part to this story as well. As a kid, we want unconditional love from our parents, and that wasn't available at that moment for him. But it was an important lesson. And another thing that was important, I think, is recognizing that there actually are incremental interventions that need to happen. Sometimes 10, 20, 40% needs to be the treatment when we can't achieve 100%. So interesting story that I think really helped me to form the direction that has helped me for these last 35 years. So the first and foremost thing you have to know about homelessness is our economic success over these last 10 or 20 years has gotten us to where we are today. So if you look at some of the headlines, you see that the number of homeless people in Los Angeles has increased dramatically over the last 10 years. Headlines saying California has the most homeless people of any state, which it does. Homeless population in San Francisco doing this for thousands. Why? Well, here you look at the wealth in this country. And what you see is up until about 1972, when our last impeachment, well, not our last impeachment before this happened, we were basically having the increase in wealth among people who are living with poverty and people who are wealthy increased about the same. But because of our economic policies since '72, we've had this huge divergence where the wealthy have gotten much richer and poor have basically stayed flat in its increase. Now, when you have wealthy people who are buying stuff, they'll push the price, like rent, up, and will take the people who have fixed income and push them out the other side, unable to stay housed. So the foremost reason why there is such an extraordinary increase in homelessness in California is because of our economic policies and our lack of building affordable housing to keep up with the level of poverty that we have. In this slide, you see that the wealth is not equally distributed across different race ethnicities. White folks have an increase in wealth over the last 10 years, 20 years, while African Americans and Hispanic Latinos have not increased at all. So when you look at the homeless population in San Francisco, which is 37% African American, when the population of San Francisco is only 6% African American, you can see that part of the reason for that is this incredible disparity in wealth. There is no place in this entire country where somebody who works a full-time minimum wage job can afford rent at less than 30% of their income. Nowhere. Not Oklahoma, not Texas, not Florida, nowhere. So we have not increased our minimum wage anywhere near what's necessary to keep up with rents. And this shows the cuts since the Trump administration has come on in federal investment in capital for building new affordable housing. So you don't need to go into the details, but this is basically $1 billion a year or less in CDBG, $1 billion or less in public housing, and so on and so forth. So the capital costs that have been there available to build new housing has been completely decimated in the last 3 years. And this slide shows that the bar is what we estimate is the number of affordable housing units we need to keep up with demand. And we've never been so below. So, yes, people who are homeless have a higher rate of substance abuse and mental health than the general population. But the driver of today's homeless expansion over the last 3 years is our economy. And we will not fix this unless we recognize that we have to change the way we do our tax structure, that we have to tax the wealthy at a much higher rate like we do in every other industrialized country, and distribute that wealth to people who are living with poverty. There is no other solution for 90% of the homeless population. It is the economics of it. As a physician, I can only do so much. So what we're going to talk about today is basically the 10%, the margin that we can actually make an impact on while we wait for this housing solution to come along. We have to recognize that we have created this problem. So if you're trying to say, should people stay on the streets or be forced into shelters? Should we have clean and sober housing that we insist people to have, or should we have a wet housing? All of that is while we wait for the economic situation and to have a different administration in the federal government that recognizes that we have an extraordinary amount of wealth in this country and is not being distributed in the way it should be. So I'm going to stop with my soapbox at this and recognize that to solve homelessness, we need a home. And when you house people, it's less cost for the government, people have better health, and most importantly, in terms of self-determination and sense of well-being, is they have greater autonomy. And nothing else around the margins is as important as housing. So while we wait, what can we do? That's what I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about. What we should do while we wait. So there are 3 hot button areas in homelessness that I want to attend to today. First is, should we do a right to shelter like in New York State versus having people on the streets? The second is, what do we do about people living with mental illness and substance use disorders who are part of our homeless population? And third, what do we do about the senior population? Because there's a huge increase in the number of people over the age of 50 who are homeless. So I've been thinking a lot while I was hiking in the Rockies about how do you make decisions when it's not really clear what the right path is. What are the sort of foundational aspects of making hard decisions in a resource-poor environment? Now, having been a primary care provider for 30 years, the thing I've noticed over and over and over again among my patients is people who feel they have control of their future, who have hope for the future, who feel that they have self-determination, are the ones who are much more likely to be healthy. Took care of a patient on Monday who was in prison for 36 years. Came out, was placed in a really crappy SRO in San Francisco. And he had very little hope for the future. His sugars were, he was diabetic, his sugars were over 600, his hemoglobin A1C was 12, his renal problems, eye problems, and so forth. He was doing very poorly. And he came into my clinic and said, well, what do I do? Life is terrible. And I said, well, what do you think? You think life is just, joyful all the time? The human condition is suffering. But what matters is the connection that we have with each other. And I said, I really care about you. You're a great guy. You've done your crime, you've done your time, but you're a sweet and gentle man. And I'm here with you for the rest of your life. And he's like, oh, I don't know. No one listens to me. Life is really bad. I'm like, well, that's true. But all we have is each other. Comes back the next week, sugar's 250. He's taking his diabetes medication, and he feels much more in control of his world. Not because I tried to be a cheerleader, but because we created this sense of belonging together. And I think that's really the critical issue, is how can we create, across all of our society, a greater freedom index, so that all of us, pooled together, have more freedom, more autonomy, more choice. So if someone, for example, dies, they don't have a lot of choice. So that drops the freedom index for society. But if we can keep people alive longer, then everyone benefits by having more freedom in the world. So here are some examples of interventions that have happened that increase freedom. Now, before I get to that, I also want to show that I think there's this commodity of freedom where you can actually exchange freedom for money and vice versa. You can buy freedom with money. So many of us go to work, and we put money in the bank, and then we use that money to take a vacation. That gives us more freedom. That's using our money for more freedom. Another example of when it went the other way is the history in this country of slavery to mass incarceration. So last March, I traveled to Alabama with a group from Glide, and we went to the Peace and Justice Memorial Lynching Museum. We went to the museum that chronicles the history of our country from slavery to mass incarceration, and also went to Selma, Alabama. Now Selma, which we all know about from the freedom marches, Martin Luther King, was also the second wealthiest city in the entire United States the year before the Civil War broke out. And if you go there today, it is a decimated city. Every building has a broken window or broken roof. And you can really see how this freedom of the African American population in Selma was stolen, turned into money for wealthy people all over the country. And now it's our opportunity, our responsibility to cash in the money that is now being held by a few people back to freedom. And then to use the idea that we need to increase freedom for all as a way to make good decisions in a resource-poor environment. So, for example, here's a picture of a poster that I did now 15 years ago, which was an effort to reduce heroin overdose in San Francisco. And we gave people Narcan and naloxone, and we taught them not to inject by themselves. And we were able to get the number of people who died from heroin overdose in San Francisco from 310 a year to 2. Now, to me, that's just another example of a decision to increase the freedom index across society, because now we have all these people who can get clean because they are alive. You cannot get clean if you're dead. Another example is pre-exposure prophylaxis. So this is a medication that we can give to people who are maybe at risk for getting HIV, and you can take this medication every day, and you will not get HIV. Now, I started out in the health department, we were giving people post-exposure prophylaxis, very, very controversial. Now, PrEP is kind of, routine. And again, we're keeping people's opportunity to have future lives greater. So we're increasing the freedom index across society. And then lastly, we have ended homelessness for 75 communities around the country for veterans. Why? Because the federal government just basically wrote a check so that HUD vouchers can be used to pay for rent for veterans. And we have made such great headway of veterans across the country that we have not made in other populations. So that's hopefully a foundational aspect that will guide these challenging questions that I'm going to bring up next. All right. So many of you have read, perhaps in the paper, Darrell Steinberg is now leading Governor Newsom's task force around homelessness. And the first thing he did when he was appointed is he said, we need to emulate New York State and create a right to shelter. Basically create enough shelter beds so that everybody who's on the streets today and across California has a place indoors to sleep. Is that a good idea?
I think so.
Okay. So, is there any evidence at all that shelters are better for your health than streets?
Yes.
No. There's never been a study that has shown that if you take people, compare them to being in the streets or in a shelter like this, that they will have a better health outcome. Now, is it just to have someone living under the rain and the snow in parts of California to live on the cold concrete? No. But if we spend all of our money on shelters, we will have none left over for what really works, which is housing. So it's a very difficult balance that we have to figure out. And cities and communities that have successfully walked this balance have used shelters like in an emergency room. The goal is when someone comes into a shelter, you assess what their needs are, and you move them into permanent housing. But if you don't have the housing available, which we don't, here in Santa Rosa, across Sonoma County, or anywhere in California, we have not nearly enough housing, as I showed by those previous slides. What do? So how do you walk this balance? The key thing for me is to be evidence-based. And as terrible as it is for people to be in tent encampments or on the streets, it is no better for their health than staying in a shelter. So we can't just do something to do something when it's going to take away our resources to do the right thing. Very difficult balance. I think here in this county, it's clear we need more shelter beds, but we can't make so many shelter beds that we don't have money left for housing. That is the challenge. So maybe there are some third paths as well. Another really important thing to recognize is that the drive to get people off the streets and into shelters is being fictitiously built on a concern around public health. So President Trump was recently in San Francisco. He was talking about how the needles that are on the streets are being washed by the rain into the ocean, and thereby causing health problems for everyone who lives in the city. It's completely not true. All the rainwater in San Francisco is captured and cleaned. And then in other communities, there's been this huge drive around hepatitis A. These hepatitis A outbreaks that have happened around homeless populations in San Diego, for example. How do you treat hepatitis A?
What is it?
Hmm?
What is it? What is hepatitis
What is
A?
hepatitis A is a viral infection that causes inflammation in the liver. And it's a self-limiting disease. It almost doesn't cause a lot of long-term harm, but it's 100% prevented through vaccination. So all you would need to do to prevent a hepatitis A outbreak among the homeless population in your community is to have outreach workers go and vaccinate people. One shot done. So it's not that hepatitis A is somehow going to jump out of a homeless encampment and into the house population. It just doesn't happen. So the population is being affected because they're not being vaccinated, and if they were vaccinated, then they wouldn't get sick. The other disease that everyone is worried about is something called typhus. Typhus is a bacterial illness, gram-positive bacteria, that is spread by the droppings of fleas that live their life cycle on rats. So the only way you can get typhus is if you're living next door to rats and you have an open wound where a flea will crawl into it. Now that's a horrible way to live, and undoubtedly people who are living in smaller can get typhus, but it is not going to affect people who are housed. So the treatment, again, is to help to control rodents. But we can't use this as an excuse to wipe out tent encampments and to take people's inadequate homes away because we're concerned about the housing population's health. So these are fictions that are being brought out by fear to drive. How about tough sheds? No data. So we don't know. So do you do things that you don't know? I think that the key here is to continue the drive towards expanding permanent support housing. That's where our money needs to go. And try to keep people safe while we wait. Tough sheds might be good. Encampments might be good. Leaving people to sleep on the streets might not be any worse than shelters. But forcing people into shelters, we know is going to cause harm if you talk about the Freedom Index. Because if people don't have a time, they get sick. Let's have some time to talk about this at the end, because I can see that there's a lot of questions about this particular controversial area. How about how to serve the subset of the homeless population that's living with mental illness and substance use disorders? Well, again, when I was starting to do this work, that was the substance use disorders and mental health disorders were the main drivers of chronic homelessness. Now it's not the same. Now that the economy has expanded and the prices of rents have expanded, we have many more people falling into homelessness who aren't necessarily living with substance use and mental health disorders. But we still have people who are walking down the street in hospital gowns, injecting on our corners and so forth. What should we do? Well, again, I'm a strong believer that if you contain people against their will, you make them sick. If you conserve people, where are you going to house them in the long term? So people who live with mental illness still can work, still can make good choices, and we have a lot of evidence of how to serve people who are living on the streets with mental illness through assertive community treatment. So this is a type of care where you get people out of the streets, you engage folks in long-term relationships, and you help people to make the best choices that they can so that they are able to take the medications that are being offered if they need it, but most importantly, getting them on a trajectory towards, again, housing. In New York City, there's a program called Community Access. And this is a program that runs something called Howie the Harp Center. Howie the Harp Center specifically takes people with severe and persistent mental illness and trains them over a 3-month intensive training program to learn a trade of serving people in being social workers and home health aides that gives them a living wage so that when they finish this training program, even though they're still homeless, they'll be able to generate enough money so that they don't have to depend as much on government handouts in the future. We need more programs like Community Access and Howie the Harp Center out there. There's nothing like that in California that specifically targets the subset of the population that's living with mental illness who can be trained for gainful employment. This program I visited in southeastern Colorado. It's called Fort Lyon. Has anyone heard of this place? So Fort Lyon is a 488-acre farm in rural Colorado. If you're a homeless person on the streets of Denver or Colorado City or Colorado Springs or Boulder, you can overnight pretty much call this phone number and a van will come get you the next day and take you to Fort Lyon where you can stay for up to 3 years at the cost of $0 a day. There are 300 people living in Fort Lyon today. And do what the programmatic expectations of people who live in Fort Lyon are? Nothing. For people who have lived all their lives in trauma, if you bring them into a drug treatment program where you expect them to, show up at 8 a.m. and to talk about the problems, it's re-traumatizing in many ways. So I love this picture because it's a picture of Fort Lyon that I took, obviously for the cars, but I think it's exactly what it's supposed to be for the people who live in it. Watch out! Slow down. Recover. 75% of the people who go to Fort Lyon end up leaving for permanent housing. What would it be like in California if we had a regional program like Fort Lyon, where anybody who's on the streets could go tomorrow just to be, just to sit and to have a decent place to live and recover and breathe? And then other things that happen at Fort Lyon is you can get your GED. They have a community college that teaches classes there. People leave there with a college degree, and again, while we wait for the housing to get built, we can help people to have more resources so that when they do finish the program, they'll need less expensive housing or more successful in the housing that's offered them. So where could we do that, for example? Does anyone recognize this?
Community hospital.
What's that?
Community hospital.
Sonoma Development.
The Sonoma Developmental Center.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
800 acres, vacant, today, on off Route 12, halfway between here and the town of Sonoma. What would that be like? What would it be like if we had this as a regional, clean and sober, self-governed facility for homeless people to go and recover?
They used to have a self-sustaining farm there also.
We used to have a self-sustaining farm here in Petaluma at St. Anthony's that they sold us for. So many of the decisions that are being made around mental illness and substance use disorders among people who are homeless is based on fear rather than fact and freedom. We are making decisions that are, I think, are fictitious in our own worries that are not based on the reality. It's much more likely for a homeless person to be assaulted than for a homeless person to assault someone else. It's much more likely for a homeless person who's on the street to have physical harm than they'll ever cause physical harm to other people. And yet so many of our policies and programs that we're trying to develop is to constrain people's choices rather than giving an array of opportunities that lead towards housing. That to me is the key, and it's not comfortable because we have to suffer the mistakes of our economic policies along the way. And you can't just do something because we've made mistakes in the past. We need to be thoughtful and evidence-based. Is around seniors. So this slide that was produced by Dennis Culhane and colleagues was a really interesting epidemiologic transition that's happening around homeless people. So I'll walk you through this for a little bit. The green slide is the average age of homeless people in 1980. And you can see that the peak age is 31. And then the red slide is the average age of homeless people, and the age distribution among homeless people in, actually I think green is 1990, right, 1990, and the red is 2000. So the average age of homeless people in 2000 is 40. And then we get to 2010, and the average age has just crossed 50. So homeless people as a group are aging. And the problems among homeless individuals who are older are different than the problems among homeless individuals who are younger. And we are not prepared to serve homeless seniors anywhere near what we need to. Margaret Cushell, my colleague at UCSF, did a study in Oakland that showed that of all the people over the age of 50 who are homeless, half of them were not homeless for a day until they were over the age of 50. I'll say that again. Of all the people over the age of 50 who are homeless in Oakland, half were not homeless for a day until they were over the age of 50. So when you think of a homeless population in your mind, you often think of someone who had a psychotic break at age 20, they've been using amphetamines and heroin and having a really rough time for many years, and now they're over the age of 50 and they've had 30 years of homelessness. That is not the epidemiology of homelessness today. Now we have people who have built our cities, who because of some bad stroke of luck or the distribution of their family wealth across their brothers and sisters, or inability to continue to do the hard labor work that has kept them housed all their lives, are ending up on our streets. And we are not as a society prepared to serve people who are going to have to be housed and age in place. There is almost no such thing in this country as an assisted living center for people who have less than $1,000 a month of income. If you're trying, for those of you who are living assisted living or have friends in assisted living or have parents who are trying to place, it's like $4,000 a month. This is a picture of the one place I found in Portland that is specifically designed for people who are living with an SSI income exclusively in an assisted living center. So across the country, I've scanned as many places that I can find, and this is the only place that the government has put together the resources so that people who are poor and seniors can age in place and die with dignity. We have a lot of work to do in this space. So I'm going to wrap up a few things. First of all, getting back to the story I started with, remember before we had all the technical problems, talking about my dad and me on the taxi? A key aspect of any homeless services is accepting people where they are. Not saying that you should do what I want to do, but I want to do what you need. And embracing folks with unconditional love. Second thing is we've got to reform our tax structure. Our economy can handle it. Proposition C, last year's Proposition C in San Francisco, led by Mark Benioff, was a plan to tax all companies that make $50 million a year or more, 0.5%, which would bring in $300 million annually just for homeless services in San Francisco. That's the kind of voter-driven propositions that we need across this entire country so that we can specifically take this extraordinary wealth, which is being held by just a few people across the state, and distribute it to many other people who don't need nearly as much to be able to achieve the autonomy we all deserve. There are no quick fixes. Forcing people into shelter, making enough shelter beds, and then making homelessness illegal is not going to improve the amount of freedom and autonomy that we have across society, and will only make us all sick. It just doesn't work. And we can't just do something because we are uncomfortable with the misery of the people that we have created. The solutions are long-term investments in housing, and anything that's going to get in the way of that direction is not going to get us to where we need to be. The treatment of trauma is safety. Some people have said the treatment of trauma is love. I don't agree with that. For people who've lived with trauma, as many people here in the room have, when you can go into your own home, lock the door, and know that you're safe, then your ability to get your brain to work again, to get your adrenal glands to stop being hyperactive, to be able to reduce the inflammation that's happening because of all those activities is much greater, and that's why housing improves health, because the treatment of trauma is safety. There's no evidence that forcing people into treatment works. So conserve people, force people into drug treatment against their will. Maybe that'll get people off the streets and we will feel safer, but it doesn't improve outcomes. So again, we're left with these really difficult situations. Many people, I'm sure, are squirming here with the things that I'm saying because it makes us all very uncomfortable to think that we are stuck in this morass that we have created for ourselves. But just doing things because we think it'll make us feel better is not going to make homeless people's health better. It's not going to reduce the number of people on the streets. And it's not going to have long-term outcomes. Yes. And now we have these while we wait interventions like Fort Lyon and Howie the Harp Center and like the living room that I visited today. While we wait for us to build enough housing, we need to keep our friends and neighbors in the homeless population safe. We need to have enough shelters so that people can get off the streets and be safe if they want to. But we can't just force people into things that won't work. So we got to do what makes sense and follow the evidence, even if it is uncomfortable. So, our goal is to have families have a decent place to live. It's not actually that much to ask. Every other industrialized country I've been Denmark, and France, and England, Germany, Switzerland. I've traveled all over the world looking at homeless services when I worked for the Obama administration. And I can assure you that we can do this and still have a hypercharged economy. People in Germany are doing just fine in their economy, and yet there's almost no street homelessness. We can do that. So, So tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah, for those of you who follow the Jewish calendar. It's a new year, it's a time of reflection. It's a time of forgiveness, it's a time of asking for acceptance for our mistakes. So I thought that closing with something from the Talmud I found recently would be a helpful place to start us off in that discussion. Do not be daunted by the world's grief. Walk humbly now, do justly now. You are not expected to complete the work, but neither are you to abandon it. This is for like 2,000 years old in the Talmud. So thank you, and I look forward to having a discussion from some of the crazy stuff I said. You want to go first? Go ahead. Go ahead.
But I'm wondering if anybody from the Board of Supervisors or the San Jose City Council is here tonight. Yeah. Could you stand up if you are and tell us who you are?
We try.
Or the Leadership Council?
Any other questions?
Well, the other thing I wanted to say is, before the fires, my rent was raised $325. And I've been looking for a less expensive place since then. And I'm not in a tiny home, but in a small place. That has a lot to do with all this too. So thank you so much, and everybody who's here.
So I think it's also really important to make questions. Right? So ask questions. No, it's great. And it's really important to tee up, but let's ask questions. And I'm just going to try to be as equitable as I can.
Hi, thank you for being here. How are you doing? So my question is, are you believing that housing is the answer to the underlying issue for each individual homeless person?
So what I heard as a question was, is housing the answer? And unequivocally, everyone needs a home. But what that home is could be incredibly varied, right? And we need to be smarter about what the options are and make sure that the type of housing that we offer everybody is the best fit for their needs. So if people can live in co-housing situations and share rent, and that's okay, then that's fine. But no one is going to get better in their health if they're on the streets.
I agree, yeah.
So, and we just, again, we need to be more imaginative to do housing faster, cheaper, and, you know, tough sheds are fine if the right person is in a tough shed.
Yeah.
But if you take someone with severe persistent mental illness and substance use disorders and put them in an isolated tough shed without services, they're not going to do well. So we need to make sure that we have the right treatment for the condition.
I've been homeless before, and I know that when I got into a home that actually wasn't the right home, not with the right people, my adrenals and my nervous system never quieted it down for me to think clearly and breathe the next step.
So are you guys okay hearing me talk? Should I get back to the microphone? Okay. You got a question back there? Yeah.
Yeah, I really was inspired by certain things that you said. Freedom was really struck a chord with me, as well as incarceration. What examples or templates do we have today? I grew up on the Navajo reservation, I have family members on 2 different reservations. What templates do we have from when you talked about freedom and incarceration? The native populations, those are some of the biggest populations that have been incarcerated. And boarding schools. So there were so many bad things and so many atrocities that happened from those, but yet people still had some health care and they still had housing, they still got education. So what can we learn from the bad things that happened with that? Because good intentions didn't have positive outcomes all the time.
So there's a lot in the question. So what I'll try to tease it apart as, since I want to stay on my theme, is I believe that a lot of the things that were done to the Native population and to the African American population was taking away freedom, right? And when you take away freedom and autonomy, you get sick. That's what my 30 years of practice has proven.
But it's
How do you get freedom back?
Yeah,
You have a place to live. That's your own.
yeah.
You can decide who you're going to have sex with, what you're going to have for dinner, and what you're going to watch on Netflix. That's your decision that you can make if you're in your own home. But if you're in a shelter or in jail, those decisions are taken by somebody else, and it makes you sick. So that's how I try to.
Charity can be your incarceration.
Say again?
Someone else's charity can be your incarceration.
I guess,
because
sure.
Unconditional love cannot bring autonomy.
Right on. Sir.
I your quote. Fear, walk through it, surprise how easy it is. That's what I'm doing right now. You all raised your hand and said where you were, we have homes and stuff. I said, here, I'm homeless. I'm the only one to raise my hand up there. I want you to understand me. You have beautiful sayings. You did well.
Thank you.
My heart. I am disabled. I'm a senior. And I'll tell you, I did this. I've been around the world twice. Before you. I have been Australia, New Zealand, Fiji. My father was in Pearl Harbor when it happened.
So, I want you to ask a question.
I am. I'm trying to say, it's homeless, but I'm going to tell you something. I am homeless, but I'm one of you. Okay? I'm human. I opened my door to the world. Understand this. You have to understand homeless first before you try to move it.
Right.
Now here comes the punchline. I've been around the world, I told you, and I graduated from high school. I did all that, right from high school. My grandparents, a lot of things there. The men, my parents. I am one of the city's father's children, old school. David Cotty, Montgomery Village is my locker buddy. You get one of the city's father's children. I was legally evicted from my apartment and nobody helped me. Both disabled. I am very happy. My parents had to travel out to a motel right downtown here. College of Mendocino. My brother and I, my mother and father. My brother has multiple sclerosis. You can see him. You can't see me. There that, okay? I feel that everybody should try homelessness, or be homeless, to understand homeless. Then it'll be a better world out here. I feel we need to know that. You need to know that. Drugs, it's the most scary thing I say. 18 years old, I became an adult that year. Now I'm 65 years old, July 1st. Change the law back to 21, because you may have your children tomorrow. I think what I said to you. So I can say, I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I am worth $5 million until my mom passes away. Taos Pharmacy, Doyle Park, homeless land, Robert Pellegrini, 6th grade.
So, you have a question? I'd love to hear
I'm
your
trying to
question.
say to you, you're beautiful what you're doing. I'm a Vietnam vet. I have a vet housing, okay? I understand you. I am right there with you people. I'm trying to understand this tonight, but you gotta understand homelessness first. It's dangerous out there right now. The kids are out there, like you said, it was down there. I don't know if it's down there.
So I think what I heard you say.
But understand the homelessness part. That's what I'm trying to say, because I am homeless, but don't judge me.
So I think what I heard you say, and I think is beautiful, is that unless you walk in someone else's shoes, you can't understand the situation. Right. So thank you for that point, which I think is so critical. Thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Regarding emergency shelter, how important is privacy to most shelterless people?
So what we've learned thus far about what shelters work, and again, the data in this space is very poor. We haven't done a lot of good analysis of what shelters work. But what we do know is if it's a shelter that is moving towards housing and it's not indefinite, then it's the most effective in helping people's health. The way you design a shelter, again, we don't have any data to show that if like a congregate shelter like I showed a picture of is any different than having your own unit. The challenge that we have today in California is we have limited resources, a federal government that is not investing in housing, so we're all working on a resource-poor environment, trying to do inadequate treatment with what we have. For me, at this point, given that we just don't have good data around the shelters, is we should not be investing in shelters hand over fist. We should be using that money to slowly creep back the housing stock that we had in the early 70s, which was sufficient for the demand. Not kind of avoiding the question because I don't really have the data.
Thank you.
You touched just briefly on budgets that have been decimated or greatly weakened, lowered by the Trump administration policies.
And by Obama.
Pardon?
And all the Democrats before have been reducing HUD expenditures since the 70s. We had 7 times greater expenditure in housing and urban development in 1972 than we do today. And it's been a continuous decrease since then.
So what brings me here tonight is I'm just seeing so much homelessness. In the last year or 2 years, it's just dramatically different. And I read about it in Los Angeles. And so it surprises me. Encampments right along Highway 12 near Stony Point. So in my mind, I'm just trying to grapple with, the budget cut obviously is one. The fires here in Santa Rosa, 2017 fires, that probably plays into it. But
it seems like the point in time count did not increase after the fires, which is really interesting. So where did all these people who lost their homes go? I think it's a great mystery and probably really...
They moved in their second home.
Mm-hmm.
They largely moved away.
Yeah, I mean, so that decimated the foundation of the community.
so, as you said, there's so many homeless that are not, they're homeless and they're not addicted to drugs. So is it just as housing costs as it costs in California particularly? I mean, all over the country, but in California, they've increased.
There are more homeless per capita in New York State than there are in California.
Does this how much? What I'm wanting from you is how much has the cost of housing, rental, or even purchasing increased to such an extent in the last short time, 4 years, that it's absolutely in big percentages, it's forcing people into homelessness.
That's correct. You turn that question into a statement and you've got the answer. The increase in the economy, the rent costs increasing at a much higher rate than wages, and then this population of homeless people aging so that the income that older people across the country can get is less, has created this economic influx of homeless adults in this country that has not been there for the 30 years that I've been doing this work. This is a new and terrible phenomenon that is the result of our purposeful efforts around the economy. Has anyone heard of opportunity zones?
Yes.
So opportunity zones were part of the tax reform package that was passed a couple years ago, the Trump tax reform package that reduced capital gains reduced corporate taxes from 36% to 23% or something. So this is a really interesting and we thought very hopeful idea. Opportunity zones are these underserved communities within cities that have a geographical identification that if you are a wealthy person, you want to avoid capital gains taxes, you can put your revenue into real estate in these cities that have a lot of poverty. It seemed like a progressive idea, but we didn't put any bumpers on it. So we didn't require that the funding goes towards low-income housing. And what has happened is that many people have used the opportunity zones to avoid capital gains taxes to make unnecessary high-end market rate housing. So now we've created a gentrification of these low-income communities by putting in expensive apartments and what was supposed to be an opportunity to take money from the rich and give to the poor actually is just making the rich richer. So it's a great idea, opportunity zones, but it just goes to show that you can't get ideas without regulations. If you could only invest in housing for people who make 30% of that area median income, then opportunity zones would have been a great intervention. So there are ways to use the wealth to create more housing that this federal administration, who are so anti-regulatory, has not invested in. Yes, with the blue.
So this might sound like a hostile question, but I'm sure you've thought of it many times.
you're in charge or partly in charge of the Benioff $30 million fund.
Yeah.
Why is that being used for research rather than to fund housing or planned camps or the Sonoma Development Center?
Yeah, so thank you, and no, it isn't the first time I've heard that. So Mark and Lynn Benioff gave UCSF $30 million to create 5 years of a research and advocacy organization that I run. How much money do we need to make an impact on the housing problems in the state? I would guess about $100 billion.
Yeah.
So in the last year, the work I've done has gotten Kaiser to invest $21 million in housing for seniors in Oakland, and $15 million for housing for mentally ill seniors in Portland, Oregon. What I hope, and I want you to hold me to it, that this investment by this couple is going to be able to turn truth and advocacy into serious intervention. $30 million wouldn't even give you half of a 100-unit building in San Francisco. Right? That's $60 million is how much it costs to build a 100-unit building in San Francisco. So it would be gone like that. My hope is to turn this money into a significant change, especially if I can get this talk back. And thank you for helping me.
Very, very good.
It's got a long way to go. But I think as we learn to do this and we get the governor and the state to actually invest seriously, maybe, he owns the Sonoma Development Center. You don't have to buy it. It's owned by the state. So how can we use these opportunities, these doors that are opened by the philanthropists to do things? But I assure you, I'm as skeptical as you are. I spent a lot of time walking in the mountains thinking, research? We don't need research, we need action.
Right, yeah.
And I hope that I can turn the research into action. Yes, sir, in the back.
Here's a couple of questions. Are you familiar with what Stanislaus County is currently doing with the homeless population?
So the question was, am I familiar with what's going on in Stanislaus County? No, what's up with Stanislaus?
So they recently started a program where they built their shelter for, so people bring their pets, and there is no affiliation between male or female.
So low barrier navigation center shelter. Yeah.
So that's the opportunity they have, that they're providing there. Again, research on it, there isn't any, so as far as citizens, and I just really be interested.
I think you should go to your elected officials. I think a piece of legislation that will hold the Sonoma Developmental Center undeveloped for 3 years, and then after that, the state can sell it to the highest bidder. But in the interim, we could house people in a self-governed, clean and sober. I think it's really critical that it's a sober living environment. That's not for all the homeless people, obviously, but for a good chunk of people who are trying to get off the streets, who want to get away from drugs, and are willing to subject themselves to breathalyzers and urine tox screens to stay in a place that's safe, and then the neighbors who are around there would feel less uncomfortable. I hope, if there isn't drugs and alcohol that's been proven to be there. So that's my hope, my dream, and that's what goes on at Fort Lyon, and it's very successful. All right, I'm going to wrap up in a second. Where are we, Daniel? What time? I've lost track.
We got about 5.
Okay, so, yes, Aniki.
So I thought it was interesting, you mentioned at the beginning the trauma that you experienced from seeing the number of AIDS patients you were treating that were dying. And when you confronted your father, the response that you got.
Yeah.
So right away I think, what can we do while we're waiting? We're all experiencing this trauma. So whether we're homeless or not, we see the homeless, and I know how on the edge I am financially. Wouldn't you think that the most critical piece of this is getting us all to that level of understanding we have choice in how to respond to this?
I think so.
Talk about trauma.
I mean, you're obviously saying what I wish I could have said better, but to me, more choice across the board will make us all healthier. And I think as we gravitate towards these more constrained interventions like conservatorship and forcing people off the streets and bringing machines to destroy people's crappy tents, I still think that's not where I would want my son to live. But I think if we just force people into shelters, we're moving in the wrong direction. So
I'm just talking about the trauma we're even experiencing in voting. In really going to our political leaders.
We'll get there. I think our time is coming. As I said, this is a nadir, but it's not the end. Yes, last question.
I think we should check all of the Democrats and the Republicans and everything. They haven't done a damn thing since 1972.
Got a question? Just chocolate. Yes. Last question.
Yeah. You know that the housing stock here has been decimated by the fires.
Right. Housing stock has been decimated by the fire.
The proposals, there's a little bit of deep money we got here. They're going for projects that won't come to life for several more years. We can't put it on the streets.
So she's saying that there's, terrible housing stock in the Santa Rosa area because of the fires. It's all-time low, and that the opportunities for building is 3 or 4 years in the future.
Right.
What do you?
So
Yeah.
there are advocates espousing the notion of tiny villages, RV, safe parking, et cetera, et cetera. The problem we're running across, and I speak with the mayor on this every month, NIMBYism is a real problem. The politicians are shaking in their boots.
Gotta have a question.
How can we turn around NIMBYism to YIMBYism?
So how do you turn NIMBYism around? In my experience, the best way is to have people who are making a connection with the folks who are going to live near you. Get out there, meet folks who are on the streets, have conversations, recognize that we are all humans, and that the decisions that we have to make to survive are often not the best decisions, and that some of us are living with mental illness and substance use disorders. But we need to just accept the fact that we have created this. It has been our choice through our ballot box to create the economic engine that we have today. We have been successful beyond our wildest dreams. And the result of that success is the horrific homeless situation we have across California. And we can't just try to do something that isn't going to work. We need to slowly, thoughtfully, and with honor to people's autonomy, move forward step by step. And that's where I will stop. Thank you very much.